I'm recording.
This. All right, so I guess we can get started. Hi, everyone. I guess we can start with some questions. Any questions from last week or from this past week? Anything? Or any questions on JavaScript in general? Yeah, because I want to make the best use of this time. So what I have in mind, like I mentioned last week, for those who joined this week, who are new this week, I'm not going to repeat the content from the Udemy course because I think that is already pretty complete. So I would like to use this time for questions from you guys, or I would also see if there are anything I would like to add to the lesson from Udemy, right? And maybe share some real world experience, and then we can also go through some questions to make sure we have a good understanding on the material. So that's what I have in mind. But I would always want to start by asking to see if there are any questions from you that I would like to make sure I answer them, or at least try to answer. Yeah, and you can, if you cannot think of anything right now, but later on, if you have any question, just feel free to let me know. Okay, so why don't we start with some? Okay, 1 second. I'm trying to juggle a few screens here. Okay, let me see how I can best. I want to see you guys while I'm talking, but at the same time, okay. So remember, one of the things. So it's mostly about strings, right, for this week. So one thing the course taught about is they have an example here. If you can see my screen here. Oh, by the way, do you know console log? So if you do a console log, it actually just echo what you typed, right? So this is a very useful technique for debugging, for investigating issues, and so on. And there is also console error. So they are basically the same, except for the presentation of the message, right? So this is presented as an error, just an FYI here. So one thing that the course talked about is the use of single quote versus double quotes. So for example, you can do something like, so here I am mixing single quotes. I use single quotes for the outer quotes, and I use double quotes for the inner quotes. As long as they are different, JavaScript would be able to, or the interpreter of the JavaScript would be able to tell that this is a quote that you want to just treat that literally as a quote, right? And that's the reason why we can print that out as a quote. And of course, you can do the opposite, right? You can do like using the single quote inside and double quotes outside. Oops. Right, so you can do the opposite. So as you can see, it will now print the single quote in the output because I use that here. So this works, but I would not recommend. So this works, but this is not the best way to handle these kind of things. And I would like to introduce a concept called escape characters for this purpose. So let's look at some information here. Okay. All right. So if you look at this doc here, it talks about escape characters. So an escape character is basically a character that cannot be conveniently represented in its literal form. So for example, the quote here, right? We cannot use double quotes for everything here because if we do, then it doesn't know which one is closing the first quote, right? So when this kind of thing happen, there is a technique called escape character that would allow you to escape and treat the character as its literal value. So an example, so if we do the same thing here using escape character, it could be something like this. So we still do console log, and then we do single quote. So I use single quote for the outside, right? And if I want to also use single quote for the actual printed message, I can do something like this. And then I will use this backslash as the escape to start the escape. So this thing here, backslash single quote, means if you do this, you're telling the interpreter of the JavaScript that you want to treat this as a single quote. So because we do this, it will be able to tell this is actually what you want it to print out. And then the second single quote here is for enclosing this string here. And that's why it can print this out. It doesn't get confused because you use the backslash here to signal a character escape here, right? So, and similarly, you can do double quotes as well. You can do this backslash double quote, and then you will be able to tell, oh, okay, you are now escaping this one. So I would just treat that as a double quote. Any questions or anything you want to clarify? Is it confusing? Using the escape character is a more common way to treat this kind of things. So that's the reason why I want to introduce that. And escape character is not limited to quotes, right? There are lots of different escape characters. We can look at a few here. I'm not going to go through the entire list here because that would be too boring. You can just look it up whenever needed. Maybe I will just go through a few ones that are more commonly used. So one of the escape sequence or escape character that are commonly used is this /n. So /n signal a new line. That's why it's n, new line. So if you do like, so let's say if we do alert. So alert would be doing the same thing as console log, except that it will show the message in the pop-up, right? So just to demonstrate that if we do alert hello, it will show this pop-up with the text hello, right? So if I now do, if I want to treat this, if I want to print two lines, right? I can do hello and then /n, and then the second line would come here. So we separate the two lines with a /n escape character. So if you do this, you will see it will have the new line in here. So this is the new line escape character, right? /n. One last one I want to just quickly talk about is the tab. I don't think this is commonly used, but I think that's pretty interesting. So this is actually a tab, like the tab key on the keyboard, right? So there are all sorts of different escape character. Keep that in mind because that is very useful, because sometimes when you want to store a string with quote as part of the value, you would use the escape character. Any questions or any comment here? If not, we will move on to the next topic. Yeah, so I think another topic we talk about is the use of um, template literals, right? So let's say I do console log again, and then I use the backtick to indicate a template literal, right? You can just treat it as string, right? As mentioned in the course, you can. So if you don't have any variable inside this template literal, it will just treat it as string. Very simple. But let's say you do something like, um, let's say you do something like you define a variable, right? And then now if you do the same thing, you can substitute that with the variable. So you use this dollar sign and then open braces, and then the variable name. You will substitute, right? So one interesting usage of this one is that let's say you have another variable called quantity, right? And you want to do something like this, right? So quantity and then the fruit. So one problem is that what if you have, if the quantity happens to be 1, then it doesn't seem grammatically correct, right? Because of the plural here. So one way to deal with that is to use some logic in the template literal, right? So for example, you can do something like this. If quantity is greater than 1, we insert we append an s at the end. Otherwise, we append nothing. Oh, there is a bug. Oh, interesting. Let me see what's going on here. Quantity greater than 1. Oh, can anyone catch this bug for me? Let me try this out. Oh, okay. You know what?
Because it's
Because
great.
I
It's
typed
greater than. Greater
yes, no,
than. Yeah.
because no, because I typed something wrong.
Yeah.
I define fruits as apples, so I have one S already. I tricked myself. So let me fix that. You see what I mean? Like I put apples as the value of fruits, so I would have at least one S at the end. So let me do it properly. Um, okay, so now fruits. Okay, let me just do it again. So fruits is apple, right? Quantity is 5. If I do this, okay, fruits. Okay, you have 5 apples, right? Because I would print the S only if the quantity is greater than 1. And now the quantity is 5, right? That's why it would add this S, append the S at the end. But then if quantity is 1, then you won't have the trailing S in here. So this is one way to handle plurals, right? If you are doing if you're printing out English, right? But in real world, we would do something better. We would do something called I18N. So just want to quickly mention this concept here. So I18N, does anyone know what I18N stand for? If yes, don't be shy, just shout it out. It seems cryptic, right? It's actually simpler than you thought. It actually stands for internationalization. The reason why internationalization is abbreviated with I18N is because there are exactly 18 characters between I and N. That's it. It's that simple. So there are 18 characters between the I and N. So instead of saying internationalization, we say I18N. So that is if you Google I18N, you will see a lot of packages, lots of open source libraries that handles I18N. So basically I18N or internationalization is a technique that we often use if you build enterprise grade system, right? That you have to handle different languages. And then nowadays, when we build front-end UI, one of the popular framework is React.js or just React. And then there is I18N library that would work well with React. We can talk about that later on, but just want to give you an idea of what we do in real world. In real world, we will not do something like this. This works technically, but this is a little too complicated or overkill to just handle this thing. We usually use this kind of I18N packages, and part of the functionality of this kind of packages is to handle plurals, and along with many other things for different languages. So just want to just have a quick mention here. All right, so that's for the templates. Next thing I want to talk about is any questions? Okay, so next thing I want to quickly talk about is the type coercion. So I think the teacher mentioned about the type coercion a little bit. Just want to have a quick make a quick note here. So basically, it means converting the type, right, from one to another. So if you do like something like this, if you do 5 plus 5, can anyone tell me what you would expect to see? Anyone? What do you think result will look like? What is the type and what is the value of result if I do something like this?
Should be an error, right?
Can you say that again?
I think it should be an error. I don't know.
Error? Okay. Does anyone have another answer other than an error?
Oh, 55. 55.
5.
Yes.
Okay. So you think the result will contain 5. Is it as a string or as a number?
The 5 in quotation is a string and that 5 is a numbers.
Yeah. So when I do this, as you mentioned, you think result will be 5, right? So is that 5 a string or a number?
5 is string.
A string. Yeah, I think I would agree with you. And let's try that out. So if I type result, it actually prints 5 as a string. And the reason why it shows 5 is because of the type coercion, right? Or conversion. So basically, when you have 5 as a string here, and then you use the plus sign, whenever you use a plus sign on strings, it doesn't mean adding them, but instead it means concatenating or joining them, right, together. So if you type 5 as a string here and then with a plus, this plus would mean concatenation. But then the second operand here is a 5 as a number. So because the first one is a string, it will know that it has to convert the second 5 from a number to a string. And then it will concatenate the two strings into one and make the 5 as a string. So this is an example of a type coercion or conversion. It is interesting to, it's actually useful to understand that because JavaScript is a weakly typed language, meaning whatever you assign to variables, depending on the type of the value, the variable will automatically have that type. So what I mean by that is that if I declare a variable n and assign that to 1, the type of this variable would be a number. But notice that I did not declare any type for the variable n in here. So how does it know that it will be a number? It's just by the value that I assign to it. I assign the number 1 to n, and then it will automatically treat n as a number. But if I now assign reusing the same variable n, if I now assign a string, the type is changed to a string. So this is one thing that people doesn't like about, including myself, doesn't like about JavaScript, because it doesn't enforce a very strict typing or type. And that's the reason why I think I mentioned last week briefly that there are different flavors of JavaScript. JavaScript is a language that keeps evolving, right? It adds different syntax every year. And then there are also different flavors of JavaScript. And one of the flavor of JavaScript is called TypeScript. So TypeScript is a flavor of JavaScript. It is very similar to JavaScript. It's basically a type of JavaScript, but except that it has a very strict enforcement on types. Just want to have a quick mention here. But back to the main point here, this is a type coercion. I think that it would be good to just mention that again, because I'm not sure if you would find that confusing from just watching the video. So I just wanted to know that. Any questions? Anything you want me to clarify?
I have one.
Yes.
So in your daily work, you don't use JavaScript, right? You use for example, a flavor that you just mentioned, like TypeScript, or you
in my
still
daily
use
work,
yeah.
Yeah, in my daily work, I actually use JavaScript.
Okay.
Yeah, I use the ES6 version of JavaScript.
Okay.
Yeah, but some of the other teams in my company use TypeScript as well.
TypeScript.
And one of the reasons why we didn't pick JavaScript, there is we didn't pick TypeScript, is for convenience, because there is no right or wrong, right? It's a preference. So when you do TypeScript, sometimes it is pretty tedious, because you have to indicate the type for each statement. So sometimes it's a bit overkill. Maybe for the fun of it, we can take a look at some example. But I'm sure if you do that day in, day out, you will be used to it and there's no issue. But okay, let's see if I get a quick example here. Yeah, this is one example, right? So you define, now here you declare an interface called account, and then it has 3 attributes or properties. And each of them you have to specify the type, number, string, and so on. So those are just the primitive types, right, that we learned in the JavaScript course. But if you use TypeScript, you have to explicitly indicate the type of each variable. And then for function, for argument, for example, this verify function has an argument of result. You have to define the type, and this is a custom type that can be pass or fail. So something like this. And I think I've seen places where when you declare a function, you have to also declare the return type, the return value of the function. You have to also specify the type of it. And then whenever there is a type mismatch, it will throw some error and so on. So it's quite tedious. Some people will like it because it has a better discipline. And if you follow that discipline, it actually makes your code less error prone, which is what I think. But yeah, so there is no better or worse kind of. Both of them are useful and popular. It's a matter of preference. In my daily job right now, we use JavaScript, but there are lots of other teams that use. Yeah, so both are popular. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. Yeah, so that's the.
Teacher.
Yep.
I have some question regarding the hierarchy and the type conversion. For example, if we have 2 types, which type would the system take as the main type?
So string has a higher precedence over numbers. I don't know why.
What about Boolean and float stuff?
I have to look it up. I don't know off the top of my head. But that's a great question. It has a system of precedence. I know string is higher than number, but I don't know the other types. Yeah, but we can quickly find out if you want to do something like let's say if we do, you said Boolean, right? So if we do like, is there something that you have in mind? What enough? Right. So here we have a string and a Boolean, right? It actually also convert the Boolean true to this to a string of true. It looks like string is higher, but I don't know what happens if I do string and number, for example. We tried that before. So if we do Boolean and number, I don't know what will happen, to be honest. Oh, it actually convert true to 1. Oh, interesting. If we do false plus 1, then it will probably be 1. Oh, interesting. I didn't know about that. Okay, so if we do Boolean and numbers, it converts the Boolean to numbers. But to be honest, in the real world, you won't write code that relies on this kind of type conversion because it would be hard to predict, right? Hard to predict and hard to understand. When people look at your code, they don't know what's going on. So you would usually do explicit type conversion in this case. But I think this one is more common. I sometimes see this kind of code because if you look at this line alone, it seems trivial, right? But sometimes you will use variables, right? Like, for example, you may have A assigned with a string of 5, and then you can have B that has the number 5, right? And then when you do something like this, if you look at this line alone, it is not immediately obvious the types of the A and B, right? Because you don't know the value. So sometimes when you write actual code in real life, you use variables, and sometimes it is important to understand the type conversion process so that you won't be confused. So yeah, it does have a system of precedence, string being higher than numbers and numbers higher than Boolean, and so on. Does that answer your question? Okay, great.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so let's see. Next. Yeah, next up, I want to talk about some commonly used string method. So the Udemy course already mentioned a handful of string methods. Those are some of the most commonly used ones. I want to just quickly mention a few more because I think those are not mentioned in the course, but I think that is quite useful. One example is a split operation. So for example, if you have a string ABC, and this is a string, right? Just one string with 5 characters. If you want to convert this into an array, I know we haven't talked about array yet, if you follow the Udemy schedule. So basically, array is a collection of items, right? If you want to split this string into an array, you can use the split method and pass the delimiter as the argument. So delimiter is like a character that will separate, that signals the boundary of items. So if I do something like this, it will basically split this string using the delimiter of a comma and you will get an array with 3 items, right? A, B, and C. So this is very useful. This is a very useful function. We use that very often. And the reason why it is used pretty common is because this kind of presentation, there is a name for this kind of presentation. Does anyone know? Does anyone know what this is? So this is called a CSV, or comma separated values. So CSV is a very commonly used way to represent information, right? We sometimes use that for data exchange. For example, in many years ago, I was working in a bank, and bank would have to exchange data with some other organization. For example, a bank may issue a Visa card, right? And then you use the Visa card issued by your bank to make some purchases. And then the bank has to settle with Visa, basically, right? They have to do some settlement every day. So some of the process would involve exchanging data between Visa and the bank. And I remember one of the example I've came across is that they use something called flat file, basically just a text file. But if you make a text file, so when you use a text file to exchange data, sometimes it is very useful to use this kind of presentation because you can easily do things like A, B, C. So this can be the first row in a table. So imagine a table with three columns, right? A, B, and C, 3 columns. And then first row can have A, B, C, and then you can have a second row, D, E, F, right? And then, so this would be a table with 2 rows and 3 columns. So this is very useful. Another example use case for CSV is when you import and export data to a spreadsheet, right? So if you use Excel, it has many cells, right? And what if you want to export the value from your Excel spreadsheet to someone else, but the recipient doesn't have the Excel program, for example, right? You can, in that case, you can export the Excel spreadsheet as a CSV text file, and send that to the other person, and vice versa, right? So CSV is a very commonly used format for data exchange. And when you use the split string method, you can split string with comma, but it is not limited to comma. For example, if you separate that with a dash, you can still split it. You just need to specify the delimiter as a dash, right? So this is a split. And then it also has another method called join, which is the reverse of split. So if I do like ABC, I split that with comma, we get the array with 3 items, A, B, and C. If I now do a join means converting an array to one string. So, and then you can specify what you want to use to join them. So it basically cancels out the first operation. I first split the ABC string into an array with 3 items, and then I join them back using comma. And that's why you get the same result as before. They basically just cancel out. To make it more fun, you can join them using different things. Then you basically you have converted this to another thing. Yeah, I just feel like playing with it. So, but you get the idea. Split and join, they are opposite. And both are very useful technique to keep in mind. Yeah, so that's split. And another one that came to my mind is start with. So let's say you have a string, and then you want to test the string. Okay, you have a string. Hello. And then I want to know if this string starts with HE, right? So it basically tests the string and see if it starts with HE. Right? This is also very useful that I want to mention. And since we talk about start with, I want to introduce one thing to you, which is, in my opinion, quite interesting. But before I continue, any questions? Yeah, so you can look up the documentation to find other string methods, but I think the ones mentioned in Udemy, along with the couple of methods I mentioned today, I think those are the commonly used ones. So when it comes to string pattern matching, one interesting and powerful concept is called regular expression, or regex, R-E-G-E-X. R-E-G-E-X is the short form for regular expression. So you sometimes hear people say regular expression, sometimes you hear regex. They mean the same thing. So this is basically a formal approach to do some pattern matching. So the start with example is a trivial and simple example because I just want to test the beginning of the string. But sometimes you want to check or you want to match a more complicated pattern. That would be the time when you use regular expression. So just to show you some example, if you go to regex101.com, I like this a lot because it is a very good way to test your regular expression. Example, you have a string hello, and then you want to, so this is where you type the test string, and this is where you type your regular expression. So this would be the pattern it will use to try matching the string here. And then there is also explanation here that is useful. So for example, if I do, this may be a bit hard for some students. If you don't fully understand that, don't worry, right? But if you can, at least you keep that in mind, because this is very useful and powerful. So if I do like this symbol and then H, so this character, this symbol here means I want to match the start of line. So if I do this thing, it means that I want to match a pattern where which begins with a lowercase h. So the lowercase h must appear at the beginning of the string being tested, and that's why it finds this as a match. So that also means if I do this, it won't find any match because the E is not the first character. So far, so good? Yeah. So this would check the beginning of, would assert the beginning of line. And if you want to check the end of line, you can do O and then this, the $sign here. But you have to do that the other way. Like if you check the beginning, it has to go first and then H, right? But if you test the end, assert the end of the match, it has to come after. So if you do this, you will find the trailing O here. And similarly, if I do H $sign, it won't find anything because H is not the last character, right? So are we good? Is it confusing? Or maybe some of you already know this. But yeah, go ahead.
For regex,
yeah.
according to your experience, what is the application of regex beyond like what I have known so far? We use regex only for like checking the quality of the password and the username like on the front end. So according to your experience, like what's the application of regex beyond that? Like
yeah, I'm happy you mentioned
regex is quite difficult, right? So
yes, it's very
yeah.
yeah. So I think you already mentioned a couple of very good examples. Validation of data, like email address, for example. If you build a form, right, that has email address as one of the inputs, you would like to make sure the input would match a certain pattern, something at something.com, for example, right? And in that case, you can use regex. And yeah, so validating form fields is one very commonly used use case. And let's try that out. Let's say if you have if you want to do a regex test for this email address, you can try something like this. So dot. The good thing about this website is that it explains everything to you. So it basically teaches you how to do it as you do it. So dot is a way to match any character. So here I basically, if I do dot star, it basically means I would match any character any times, at 0 to unlimited times. So the this asterisk or the star here means matching that between 0 and unlimited times. So if I do dot star, it means I match any character 0 to unlimited times, and that's why it matches anything, right? Basically anything. And then if you do this, so this is treated literally as the @ sign. So it immediately changes. Notice that when I type this this thing here, it changes the matching. It now matches this thing, right? And I can again use the similar technique to do this, and then I want to match the dot, and this is when you use escape character, because if you use dot, it will be treated as this dot here, right? So you can use this. So this escape dot would match this dot here, right? And then com. So this is a very basic example of how you can validate an email input to make sure it matches this pattern. So if without using regex, it would be extremely tedious. You will have to do a lot of if then else statements. It will be extremely messy if it even works, right? So it's very powerful. So I would encourage you to make some time to learn it. In my own experience, the best way to learn it is to use this website and experiment with it. Because initially, when I was younger, I read books. I tried to read a book about regex, and then I couldn't even finish the first 10 pages because it was so boring. And so the best way to, in my opinion, the best way to learn that is by experimenting. And you can use this website, or you can use any other website that you like. But I like the explanation here. It teaches you a lot. Okay, so just to integrate this with what we learned here, JavaScript. Let me find an example. Okay, if I want to do this check in JavaScript, right? So how do we do that? So let's say I have an email address. Right? And I want to check if this is a valid email address. So what I can do is that I can do email, which is a string, and then I can do match. So there's a string method called match. It will match your string with a regex. And to specify a regex in JavaScript, you use 2 slashes. And in between, you will put the regex. So here, I have used this website to come up with this pattern, this regex, right? I would copy and paste in here. And if I do that, it will return a match. So you know that it is a valid email address. But if I have an invalid, ABC is an invalid email address. So if I do this, it doesn't return anything because it's invalid. You see what I mean? So this is how you can use. So regex is not specific to JavaScript. It's a general concept. It is being used in basically any computer programming languages, right? But to use that with JavaScript, we can use the match string method, and you provide a regex in. You just need to use 2 slashes to indicate this is a regex. So does that answer your question, Ponya?
Yes, yes.
Great. One last example. I know it could be boring, but I think it is fun to share this one. So can anyone tell me what it does? Okay, so this line here. Do you know what A to Z in bracket means? So the best way to
Is it
find out.
capital letter
Yeah. Sorry, can you say that again?
or uppercase letter?
Yes, uppercase. Yes. So this is exactly the function of doing this is to exactly find out all the uppercase characters, because I'm matching anything from. So this is a range, right, from A to Z, but they have to be uppercase. And in this case, the only uppercase character is the uppercase H here. So as you can imagine, if I change this to lowercase a to z, you will find all the other characters. So this basically this would find all the uppercase characters, and this would find all the lowercase characters, and you can do that using this one. So A to Z. The reason I bring up this example is because A to Z in square brackets is a very common pattern we use in regex. Whenever you want to validate a value, that has to be a character, alphabetical character, you would use this thing, right? So this is useful. Yeah, so I think that's enough for regex. I don't want to make it too boring, but keep that in mind. It is useful, powerful. Take some time to learn it if you haven't already learned it, and it will be very useful. Okay, any comments? Anything you want to add? Any questions? If not, I will stop talking about regex and move on to the next topic here. All right. Okay, so okay, another thing Udemy talk about is the difference between null and undefined, right? Can anyone explain to me the difference between null and undefined? Null versus undefined. Are they the same or are they different? Are they similar? What are the differences? Anyone? What's the difference between null and undefined? So they are very similar, but they are different. So basically, you can treat them. So imagine you're filling out a form, right? And then for some of the value, you don't have anything to fill. So you can either fill that out with nil or NA or something like this, right? To indicate that I don't have anything for this field. The other way is just to leave it out, right? Just to leave it blank. So the way I see it is that if you assign a variable with null, it is like when you type NA in, or you fill NA in the field to indicate I don't have anything for this field. You explicitly indicate there's nothing, right? And undefined, on the other hand, is like you are leaving out a field. You just don't fill out any information. Does that help? So if I do this, okay. Let me start fresh. Okay, so if I declare a variable A and I do not assign anything to it, it is undefined because I haven't assigned anything. Just like in the form, you haven't filled out anything at all, right? But then if I assign null to another variable, you explicitly indicate there's nothing for this variable. So it is a little hard to appreciate why JavaScript needs to differentiate the differences between undefined and null because they are so similar. But as you learn more, as you have more experience on JavaScript and maybe doing some real-world example, you will realize that sometimes it is useful to explicitly assign null to variables, because sometimes you may have a function that would do some computation and then based on some conditions. And sometimes you want to explicitly say that there's nothing. Nothing is a valid result, right? And you assign that nothing to a variable, and in that case, you may choose to use null, so that you can clearly indicate there's nothing for this variable. Because otherwise, if there is no distinction between undefined and null, you won't be able to tell whether this is computed as nothing or if that hasn't been assigned anything. You see what I mean? Right? So it could be tricky. So that's the reason why we need the two things to, although they're so similar, right? They are a little different, and they both have values, like useful scenario. So that's undefined and null. And any questions? Oh, one thing. Go ahead.
I now understand the difference between null and undefined. But JavaScript has another thing. It's called nan. Can you please explain that to me?
Yeah. You talk about this NaN, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it stands for not a number. So whenever you do like, oh no, this is infinity. Yeah. So if you do something invalid, like 0 divided by 0, there is no way to compute this value because it's invalid. But you still need a way to represent the value. And that's the reason why there is something called not a number for this kind of scenario. Right? Because when you do this kind of, anything you do here has to be, it has to evaluate anything you do, right? So for things that doesn't compute to any valid values, JavaScript interpreter, or the computer running JavaScript, it still has to evaluate the expression and give you some value. So that's why it has the JavaScript language has defined this kind of value for this kind of scenario. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Like in real life application, like in what scenario that we have to use NAND, like according to your experience?
For example, you may sometimes do like I don't remember exactly if I can do this. Oh, okay. No, I think there is something called is NAN. Let me find it. I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, is NAN. Okay, so let's look at this example. So there is a function called isNan, which will return true if the supplied argument is not a number. So I think if I do this, it returns false because 1 is a valid number. But if I do what we did before, right, 0 divided by 0, it returns true because this evaluates to something that is not a valid number. So this is one example of how or why NAND is an important concept. Because sometimes when you do some computation, you don't know you cannot predict the argument or the value supplied to your function, right? And sometimes it could compute to a NAND. Does that help?
Yes, yes, yeah. I got it
Okay.
now. Yeah, because normally I saw there's always some confusion between now undefined and now I got it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, any other questions? If not, maybe we can look at some questions together. The reason I want to do this is to make sure we have a good understanding. Today is the 17th. Yeah, we may not need to finish all of them, so don't worry. I just want to go through a few questions for fun. This is tricky. I don't expect. If you don't know the answer of this one, don't worry. This is meant to be a fun question. But who knows, right? Maybe sometime one day when you do a job interview, maybe the interviewer will ask you this, right? Interestingly, so who thinks it will return an object? Okay, how about primitive? Raise your hand if you think the type of null is primitive. Okay. Undefined? How about string? Okay, so excellent. Different people have different opinion because this is so confusing, right? So there is no type called primitive. So this is not a valid type at all, right? So this is not a valid type in JavaScript. But object, undefined, and string, they are all valid types. So interestingly, type of null actually returns an object. If I remember correctly, let me just verify my understanding. Yeah, type of null is an object. I don't know why, but it just so happened that it is treated as an object. If you know JavaScript well, you will know that there is a function called object keys. I know this is beyond the scope of this week, but just for fun, if I have an object, later on we will talk about the concept of an object, but basically it is a way to store data. So if I define an object with a property A with the value of a string A, right? Type of this object would be an object. This is obvious, right? There's no issue with that. And then if you do object.keys, it will basically return an array of all the property key in here. So that's why it returned A here. So when I learned about this, so as I was preparing for today, I did some research of null. And since this is an object, I would naturally try to do this. And this is new to me. I've never tried it before. And it turns out that it cannot return anything. So if you provide an object to object keys, it should print out an array, right? But then now being an object doesn't print anything, doesn't have any property. So this is weird. I'm sure this is that null is implemented as a special case in the JavaScript language, but just for fun. Don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about yet, but you know, just for fun. So, but type of null is an object. Okay, we talked about this before.
Can I add one thing? Can
Yes,
I
you can.
add one weird thing? If
Yeah.
we type of NIN, what kind of variable? Yeah, it's very interesting, right?
Yeah, you mean the NAN?
Yeah, AN, yeah.
It's a number.
It's a
So this
number.
is more sensible because at least, so this means not a number, right? But the type of it is a number. So JavaScript uses a number called NAN to indicate something that is not a number. Yeah, coding is fun, right? So just remember the special case. NAN is a number and null is an object. Oh, by the way, we talked about undefined now. I just want to add one more thing. If you compare null with undefined, do you think you will get a true or false? They are so similar, but they are different, right? So if I use, last week we talked about the 2 equal sign and 3 equal sign, right? So comparison operator is the 2 equal sign. The 3 equal sign is a strict comparison operator. So if I do, I cannot type it in here because it will evaluate right away. So if I do undefined and then equal null, who thinks it will return true? Raise your hand. So undefined equal null. Who thinks it will return true? No one? Okay, let's try that out. It actually return true. But if we do 3 equals, it return false. Why? Because they are very similar. So if I do a regular loose comparison, it will treat it as true. If I do a strict comparison, remember strict comparison also consider the type as well. So both the value and the type has to match for a strict comparison to hold. So in this case, they are of different type because type of undefined is undefined and type of null, as we know, is an object. So their type doesn't match. So it is not surprising for this to evaluate to false because even the type is not matching, right? But this is something we may need to keep in mind. Undefined, if I do a regular comparison, it evaluates to true. And this is actually quite useful because sometimes when you do if statement, you may want to do some conditioning, conditional logic, and then one of the variable evaluate to undefined and the other one evaluate to null. And in that case, you may want to treat them as equal, right? So that's why it's important to understand the difference between 2 equal sign and versus 3 equal sign. So the 3 equal sign is a strict comparison. It takes the type into consideration as well. All right, so that's all for the corner cases. Okay, so we talk about this. Okay, so for this one, which of these expressions is or are true? So I have 3 stars. It may be hard to see with this. Let me change the font. 3 asterisks as a string. And I check the length property. I see if that is strictly equal to 3. The other one is to do something like this and see if it equals to 1 asterisk. So who thinks the first one is true? Can you click the raise hand button? Okay, see Yi think this is true. And also Watana. Okay. Yeah, you can lower your hand. And how about the second one here? Is it a true? If yes, you can click the raise hand button. Okay, I see that. Okay, yeah, thank you. In fact, both of them are true. And the reason is that, okay, let me just verify that to make sure I'm not lying. So this is true. The reason this is true is because this is a string with 3 asterisks, right? 3 stars. If I check the length of it, it has 3 characters, so the thing is 3. That's why it is true. And for the second one, if I do something like this, it actually return the first character because it is indexed, is 0-based index, basically. It starts with 0. So 0 refers to the first character in this string, which happened to be an asterisk. And that's why it is true. Because if I do this, it returns the first character, right? So similarly in here, if I do this, it returns the first star. That's why this returns true. Are we good? Okay, perfect. Okay, couple more questions and then we will wrap up. Okay, I promise I won't make it too confusing for you. So for this question here, if I do 3 plus 1 plus oranges, can I have a volunteer? How about Ponya? Any idea?
I think should be B. I don't know. Just guess.
B?
Yes, B.
You think it's B, right?
Yes.
Can
yes.
you explain why you think it is 4 oranges and not 31?
Because 3 and 1 should be the same data type, and right here is a concatenate operation. So 4 plus orange at 3.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. You got it. Yeah, because when we evaluate this expression, we go from left to right, right? So since we have 2 numbers here, and we start from left to right, when 3 plus 1 and they're both numbers, it evaluates to 4. And then when the number 4 plus a string, since the string has a high precedence, as we mentioned, right? The number 4 get converted to a string, and that's why there are 4 oranges. Let's verify that quickly. Yep, 4 oranges. Excellent job. Okay, so let's do one more. Okay, how about this one? How about this one? How many oranges? 4 or 31 on any end? I promise this is the last trick question, okay? Any volunteer? How about Watana? What do you think?
I think it might result in C.
C? Can you explain?
Because we compute from left to right, so the orange plus 3 it's concatenate, and then when it plus 1 it concatenate again.
Oh, excellent job. Yes. Wow, I'm impressed. This is actually quite tricky, but you got it. Yes. And you explained that very well. Let's confirm. Yeah, you got it. From left to right, and then because of the type conversion, oranges concatenate with 3, and then concatenate with 1. That's why we got 31 oranges. Wow, excellent. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't have anything else for today. Unless you have any questions or any comments or anything you want to clarify. Okay, so I hope you find that useful, and we will continue next week. Yuki, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I don't have it yet.
All
Because
right,
I think it will be
yeah.
very fun now, because now they have the data types already. They can do more
Yes.
things now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Next
exactly.
lesson. Next.
Yeah, I think we have gone through all the types already. So the next week, I think
Yeah.
we'll talk about the conditional logic with and else and so on. Yeah, it should be more fun.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, take care, everyone, and see you next week.
Thank you, Homan. Thank you.
Okay.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you.
Thank you. Goodbye, teacher.
Goodbye.